We're having mango strawberry waffles, and I'm having hot lemon with honey to go along with that. James is going to be talking about
ideas of CBC last night, and it was going the night before, and it'll be going tonight. This is a counter advertisement. Not saying don't listen to it, but be prepared to laugh at the silliness. If you don't laugh at the silliness, there's maybe something a little bit wrong with you, your moral compass, and a variety of other things, and maybe your skeptical index, skeptical register, whatever you want to call it. So right now I'm proposing that they call it the full title, Bad Ideas, although they've had a few people on that actually had some ideas over the course of my listening to them. So maybe that wouldn't be fair to some of the people that they have on. Ideals, maybe? I don't know. Because so much of it isn't truthful. The night before, it seemed to me they were talking about World War II. I didn't listen to all of it. I had to do eye watering or something like that. Much more important. They seem to be dealing with World War II propaganda, as they put it, in Hollywood. And it was awful. You know, the propaganda that the Americans did, dehumanizing the Japanese. I don't know if they mentioned dehumanizing the Germans terribly. They must have somewhere along the line. You know, the way the Germans were behaving was kind of not terribly humane and not terribly human. I'm talking about the Nazis and the people who are willing to go along. Little disclosure here, I'm part German. And if you're portraying the Germans during World War II as not being terribly human, and not just humane, I'm talking about the Nazis and the Germans who went along with them, which was the majority. And then you're kind of doing right by the truth, and you're kind of doing right ethically. The Japanese were behaving, if anything, even more brutally than I'm talking about the Japanese in Japan. Than the Germans were. They were doing medical experiments on people. They were, I think the mass slaughters that they did in Shanghai, Nanking, I'm told perhaps in Singapore, Manila, gather, where I don't think the Germans ever did anything quite as egregious. They say Nanking and Shanghai, 100,000. I just woke up. 100,000 deaths apiece. Many civilians. I don't know if the Germans ever did that kind of stuff. The Russians did the cat and forest thing. What were they saying? 37,000 officers. So here's one example. I don't know how widespread it. A group of Japanese soldiers, I presume officers, were having a competition. It was either Shanghai or Nanking to see how many people they could behead. It'd be Chinese people. And I think the winner of the competition had something like 100. Pretty impressive.
In how long?
Well, this would be presumably in a day. This slashing, stuff like that. So he would have been responsible for 1 out of 1,000 people killed. So when you portray folks like that as being not quite human, you're kind of describing them accurately. So that was the night before. Last night they were talking about the Vietnamese War. John Wayne being a racist. Well, what was it? Something about the Green Berets. I can't remember the full title. It was, I guess, considered a classic of sorts. Back in the day, Ballad of the Green Berets. Was that it? I mean, Barry Sandler, was that his name? He had a hit called The Ballad of the Green Berets, and I think it might have been taken from that movie, but I'm not sure. Never saw it. Don't care to. Maybe one of these
we've
things.
watched a lot of John Wayne movies, and they're not good.
The guy was awful. No. I'm going to take John Wayne seriously. Got a bit of a problem. Anyway, the guy who had this great idea, these great ideas, yes, he did. He kept on referring to Baudrillard. He styled him as a French philosopher. He is French. Philosopher? I say a misosopher. What does misosopher mean for you folks? I ran across that philosophy professor. I called him a misosopher. He didn't understand. Guy that hasn't studied enough Greek. If you're a philosopher in a so-called Western, but a Western university, and you don't know enough Greek to understand misosopher, what that means, you should get busted down to private. Anyway, it means a hater of wisdom. Hater of wisdom. Baudrillard. And any number of his ilk, including Derrida, Foucault. Oh, what are those guys all have in common? I think they're all guys, and I think they're all French. Description or not. I don't want to pick on the French. I mean, oh yeah, we can chuck it. We won't chuck in Camus. I don't think it's terribly popular amongst the faux gauches. But Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, oh, she ain't a guy, but we're still going to include her in that. French. Misosophists, generally. So, the big idea, yeah, this was called, they should call it, what's the big idea? Yeah. What's the big idea now? The big idea. Here's the bottom line. There's they were quoting Robert McNamara, and Robert McNamara was a good dude back then. Secretary of Defense, I think, back during the Kennedy administration. I think it continued on into the Johnson administration. It's funny, he'd been named head of Ford, and I don't think that lasted long. He was recruited by Kennedy.
Long story. Hey, your little piece.
And it's fairly cool out here. It's supposed to get down to about 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's not Fahrenheit if you're watching the United States. That's centigrade. So it might not be as bad as you think. But Robert McNamara, I've seen him crying about what happened in Vietnam. It's awful what the Americans had to do there in order to get, for the longest time, a tie. This is one of the places where they won the Cold War. They lost the campaign, but they won the Cold War. And how did they do that? They slowed down the commies. That's one of the key places. They slowed them down for a generation. 1945 to 1975. And what was happening in much of the world after 1945, I think the more relatively free world, I don't want to call it the free world because many of the places didn't believe in democracy. When they were taken over by communism, they certainly became more unfree. I think in the Truman administration, so from 45 until early 1953, we'll say through 1952, the relatively free world, or the more relatively free world, lost 22 countries to communism. 22. So that's almost a rate of 3 countries per year. Just boom, 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 boom. And there are some big countries like China and huge countries. The most populous country in the world back then, as it still is. And this, they thought, was really profound. They were saying an American general was talking. This was after either the American withdrawal or else after the so-called win of the Vietnamese. We'll call them the northern Vietnamese, the communists. The Nazi communists, they were nationalists too. They keep on saying, on the big, what's the big ideas program? It was a nationalist movement. Hey, you can combine nationalism with communism. That's what was happening in the so-called Third World with these so-called freedom movements or so-called independence movements. I've started to realize they weren't even independence movements, because here's what they are nowadays. Help us, we're incompetent, help. Oh no, it's not incompetent. It's your fault that we're so poor and that we're so ignorant and so intolerant and so violent. Please help us. Well, they don't even say that. It's your fault.
Yeah, I don't think they say please.
You owe us. No, they don't say please. Come on, Germany. You had a handful of colonies in Africa, and we're sitting here wherever in Asia or something like that. Pakistan. Give us money. You're exploiting us. You know, they had what, maybe, we'll say a half dozen colonies for, roughly from maybe 1870, it was after 1870, to 1919. That's like 50 years. And they haven't gotten over it. All the rest of the third world, help, Germany, send us money. Don't spent how it's spent because it's going in us rulers' pockets.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it last night, how a lot of poorer countries, they're not shutting down, they're not creating a bubble, and they'll say, well, we need tourism dollars or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, here in Canada, I don't think you could find a place where it relies on tourism dollars more than Prince Edward Island. I mean, what else do they have? Potatoes?
Yeah.
Potatoes and tourism.
And a few, probably some fishing.
Yes, some lobster. A few lobster, potatoes, and tourism. And honestly, I don't know how much the lobster, that kind of ties in with the tourism. I think they feed that to the tourists.
There we go. Yeah,
but they're in a bubble. They've been in the bubble the whole time.
That's what I gather. And it's been a while now. It's been basically 2 tourist seasons.
Yeah.
That should be pointed out.
Yeah. Because their tourist season's very short, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's
the summertime,
it's
right?
just basically
parts of the summer.
Late July and August, I think.
Well, there you go. And you kind of know Prince Edward Island because you lived there.
Only briefly.
Only briefly, but you did live there. And you've had an abiding interest in it too, right? You want to move back there.
I kept researching it. I'd look at the weather there and whatever on a day-to-day basis when I had the internet at home, just to try to come up with patterns.
And it should be said, it's not just the climate you prefer there. You kind of prefer the social climate down there. You like the folks down there.
Yes.
You're watching from Prince Edward Island. I visited down there. You seem like very civilized people down there. Friendly.
I mean, that's not everyone, right? I didn't meet everyone.
No.
There. I don't know.
Kind of like what I think of as an ideal Canadian. That's what seemed like just
that's what
friendly,
I think too.
Laid back, humble. Kind of like the way I used to be. I wish I could find more people to be friendly with, I can't be laid back. I can't be humble. Like I say, I'm proud to be pretentious. I'm proud. I work on it. Or not pretentious, arrogant.
Yes.
Well,
you're really tired this morning.
I'm really tired. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm proud to be arrogant. I work at it. But you folks who watch, one or two of you, this thing regularly, I work hard, learning languages, learning history, learning geography, learn. I strive not to be pretentious. Are you listening, you Fogoshes, you pretentious pukes? So, the big ideas. They're quoting this American general who was talking at the end of the war in Vietnam. And he said, what happened? How did we lose it? We didn't lose a battle. And the Vietnamese guy was supposed to be saying something profound, and it wasn't. It was just like, yes, we lost every battle, but we won the war. Yeah, okay. It was a campaign in a big war called the Cold War. Newsflash. Who won the Cold War, you Fogoshes? They keep on going, hey, the good guys won the Vietnamese war. No, the bad guys won that campaign, but they lost the big war. Newsflash, you Fogoshes.
Yeah, well, I think the war is still going on, so...
It's, in Asia, there may be 6 countries that went relatively liberated by the Americans in the Cold War. Newsflash, they were relatively liberated, mainly in Eastern Europe, but elsewhere. Afghanistan, until Pakistan decided to imperialize it, and they'll be colonizing it with their we don't live in post-colonial times, so it's happening again. They're in the process. Biden's pulling out. He announced it. Biden, you're stupid about that, buddy. Stupid, you're looking like Jimmy Carter. You're looking like the worst of Obama. Just make sure you don't blow the economy, dude. But announce you're pulling out of Afghanistan, and they're having trouble pulling it's collapsing so quickly. I don't know when they're scheduled to be out of there. Is it in the fall or the end of the year or something like that? I think they want to do it on the anniversary of 9/11. It's stupid because, what's going to be happening? The Taliban are going to be celebrating, hey, 9/11! We own almost all of Afghanistan. I understand the Taliban are the cat's paws of Pakistan. Pakistan isn't, like they were going, the Fogosians. So Americans want the oil and gas in Afghanistan and Central Asia.
Well, isn't America,
everyone wants oil and gas?
Isn't the United States still the largest exporter of oil in the world?
Well, it's not still. I wouldn't say exporter. They are, and since Obama, the biggest producers.
Okay.
They're the hugest users. But the stuff they produce, they use, plus they bring in. They're still importing.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't think they, speaking of oil and gas, especially gas, I don't think much of it would have made it to American markets. People are going, America and Libya, America wanted to get rid of Gaddafi so they could get hold of Libyan oil. Yeah, I don't know if they would have got. The places where they get most of the oil from we're sitting on it. Alberta, Canada, and Venezuela, Mexico. Of course, a lot of it they produce themselves even now, especially with fracking. And Nigeria, maybe. Stuff like that. I think most of the Libyan oil goes to Europe. Europe's a big honking place. Western Europe's about the population of the United States, and it uses oil more efficiently than Americans tend to, but still use a lot of oil. Libya's not a huge, big producer anyway, by comparison with other places in the Middle East, for example. But, and then when we're talking about Iraqi oil, where does most of that go? Now, if you checked it out, I suspect you find it headed east. Why bring it through the Suez Canal around the Horn of Africa when there are big economies like Japan, India, and particularly China off to the east? I think that's where most of it goes. Well, Americans wanted to control that oil back in 2003. They wanted it for their own, to guzzle,
Well,
I think they just wanted to make sure that Saddam Hussein didn't corner the market by taking over the Middle East. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to control the Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, and Iranian oil too.
Well,
he wouldn't have to do too much invasion to get all of those. And what would he had? 50% of the world's oil resources if he'd done
might
that.
it have something to do with trying to control the flow to China, though?
What, 2003? No, they want to keep the world market open for oil. They don't want someone monopolizing it. So we could check and see. I mean, it's an important issue. Bush Jr. was saying, I think even as he had his tush down on the seat of power, that we're going to have to deal with China. Now, everyone's going to have to deal with China. China is a problem for everyone. I'm talking about the People's Republic of China. They are the world's new bully.
You still have a couple minutes.
Okay, so I want to talk about what that general was saying. Yeah, that's actually not that profound. So I'm not going to be that profound, but it's going to be a new thought for the folk oceans. And it's actually a new thought for me. You know, the Americans lost some places in the Cold War, some campaigns, like Vietnam. They tied so many, like Korea. And they did lose. They lost tons of countries, well over the 22 that they lost during the Truman administration. So it could have been like 30 countries all told. And they recouped all but 6 of them back. You see, what happened is they didn't win maybe any campaigns during the Cold War. And like the Vietnamese in a campaign. But this is a whole war that lasted from, get this straight, it didn't start in 1945 or 44, Richard Rhodes, dude. It started in 1917. That's when the Cold War started. 1917. Get that straight. So it lasted, what is that, 1917 to 1991. What is that, 74 years. That's a long, long war. And they won it. They were losing, tying battles, and they won it. And how did they do it? With patience, with being tough, hard as nails. So that Robert McNamara, he's right to cry about the stuff that he did. But what he should be crying about is how nasty the commies were and still are. How nasty they were, and how the Americans had to get down and dirty in the gutter with these scumbugs, the commies, including the commies in Vietnam. I don't care if they're people of color and stuff like that. Ho Chi Minh was a nasty scumbag. I'm told, it could be wrong, that he was a founding member of the French Communist Party. Surely they had a Communist Party before 1918, but that's when he joined up. Again, my source might be wrong. Long-term member of the Communist Party, and that's around the time of Lenin. What did Lenin say? It was a sound chomp, not a sound bite. We are going to be doing revolutionary terrorism. That's what Ho Chi Minh did, and the Americans did counter-terrorism, and they did it pretty darn well. They got down and dirty, but the people who are responsible for it were the commies. Okay? Enough said. Put that in your hash pipes and smoke it.